She called me on a Tuesday morning, and her first words weren't hello. Dad, we're done waiting. I've already transferred the deed on the farmhouse. You'll need to be out by the end of the month. I stood in my kitchen, still holding a coffee mug I'd had since 1987, the one my wife June bought at a roadside diner in Tennessee on our honeymoon. I didn't say anything for a long moment. My daughter, my only daughter Renee, was on the other end of the line, and I could hear her husband, a man named Craig, saying something in the background, probably coaching her. You transferred the deed, I repeated. We talked about this, Dad. You said you wanted us to handle things. I hadn't said that. What I had said 8 months earlier was that I was open to discussing what would happen to the property after I was gone. That was a conversation over pot roast at Christmas, not a legal transaction, not a transfer of anything. Renee, I said, you need to listen to me very carefully. But she'd already hung up. I set the mug down on the counter slowly, the way you do when your hands are shaking and you don't want to drop something. Outside the kitchen window, I could see the barn my father built in 1962. I could see the tree line at the back of the property where I used to take my son fishing when he was 6 years old. I could see 63 years of my family's life spread out across 42 acres in rural Virginia. And according to my daughter, none of it was mine anymore. Let me back up. My name is George, and I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county. Nights and weekends, I worked the land. My father passed it down to me in 1998, and I swore to him. I stood at his bedside, and I swore that I would keep it in the family. The farmhouse was built in 1911. It had been in our name for 4 generations. It wasn't worth millions, not by city standards. The land and the property appraised somewhere around $800,000 the last time we had it looked at. But you don't measure something like that in dollars. You measure it in the rope swing still hanging from the old sycamore. You measure it in the names carved into the doorframe where June used to mark our kids' heights every birthday. My son Patrick lives out in Colorado now. He's a good man. He checks in. He visits when he can. And he has never once asked me what I plan to do with the property. He always says the same thing. It's yours, Dad. Do whatever feels right. Renee is different. Renee married Craig about 11 years ago, and from almost the first year of that marriage, I could see the way he looked at things. Not at people, at things. He'd walk through a room and you could watch his eyes move like he was doing inventory. When June was sick, near the end, Craig asked me twice whether we had a will in place. June hadn't even passed yet. She was still in the hospital. He asked me twice. I didn't say anything about it then because Renee loved him, and I believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. I was raised that way. My father used to say that you judge a man over years, not moments. So I gave Craig years. He didn't get better. After June passed, Renee started calling more often. At first I thought it was grief. The two of them checking in, being family. But the conversations always circled back to the same place. The farmhouse was too big for one person. I was getting older. Wouldn't it make sense to simplify? Had I thought about a retirement community? There was a nice one 40 minutes from where they lived in Richmond. I told her I was fine. I had neighbors I'd known for decades. I had my routine. I had the land. Then, about a year ago, Craig got involved with a real estate investment group. I don't know all the details. He was vague whenever it came up. But I got the sense they were buying up rural properties in Virginia and West Virginia, developing them, flipping them. One evening he mentioned, almost casually, that land like mine was exactly what the market was hungry for right now. I changed the subject, but I remembered it. A few months after that, Renee called with a new idea. She wanted to help me organize my affairs. She had a friend who was a notary. She'd been talking to an estate attorney. She said she wanted to make sure I was protected, that things were in order, that I wouldn't have to worry. She kept using the word worry, as though I were some confused old man who couldn't handle his own paperwork. I told her I had my own attorney, a man named Holloway, who'd handled my family's legal work for going on 20 years. She said that was fine, that was good, but wouldn't it be easier if she just brought some documents over so we could get everything signed and stored in one place? I should have said no right then. I should have been firmer. But she was my daughter. And she cried on the phone sometimes, talking about how much she missed her mother, and I am not made of stone. I let her come. She came on a Saturday in October with Craig and a folder of papers. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table where I had sat with my father, and with my children when they were small, and I signed where she pointed. She told me it was a property management agreement, giving her limited authority to handle maintenance contracts and tax filings while I was still living on the property. I didn't read every page the way I should have. I know that. I'm not looking for sympathy on that point. It was my mistake, and I own it, but she was my daughter, sitting in my kitchen, and I trusted her. What I signed was not a property management agreement. I found that out 3 months later when I got a letter from the county clerk's office confirming the recording of a deed transfer. The property, all 42 acres including the farmhouse and outbuildings, had been transferred into a limited liability company registered in Virginia. The sole members of that LLC were Renee and Craig. I read that letter 4 times standing at the mailbox in the cold. Then I called Holloway. He was quiet for a long time after I explained it. Then he said, "George, don't touch anything. Don't sign anything else. Come in tomorrow morning." I was in his office at 8 a.m. What he told me over the next hour was both worse and better than I expected. Worse, because what Renee and Craig had done was more deliberate than I'd let myself believe. The document I signed had been prepared specifically to obscure what it actually transferred. It used the language of a management agreement in the opening sections, but contained a deed transfer provision buried 60 pages in. Holloway said he'd seen variations of this kind of thing before, usually targeting elderly property owners. He said the word fraud plainly, without softening it. Better, because I had options. The deed transfer had been recorded, but Holloway believed we could challenge it on grounds of fraud and undue influence. He also pointed out something I hadn't considered. The document Renee had brought was notarized, but the notary had not been present when I signed. Renee told me her friend handled it afterward. That, Holloway said, was a significant problem for their side. A notarization without the notary witnessing the signature is invalid in Virginia. The entire transfer could potentially be voided. He also asked me a question I'll never forget. "George, do you have any record of the conversations leading up to this?" Texts, emails, voicemails? I did. I'm an engineer by training. I'm methodical by nature. Over the previous 8 months of Renee and Craig's campaign to help me organize my affairs, I had saved every text message, every voicemail, and printed out every email. Not because I suspected fraud specifically, because I am the kind of person who keeps records. My father was the same way. He kept receipts for things he bought in 1974. I handed Holloway a manila envelope with everything in it. He looked through it for about 10 minutes. Then he looked up and said, "Okay, we're going to be all right." I want to tell you that I felt relief in that moment. Mostly what I felt was grief, not for the property, though I was terrified of losing it. Grief for the version of my daughter I'd believed in for 60-some years. The little girl who used to follow me around the barn asking questions about everything. The teenager who cried on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart. Somewhere between that girl and the woman sitting across from me in my kitchen pointing to signature lines, something had gone very wrong. I didn't know if it was Craig's influence or something that had always been there underneath, waiting. I still don't know, but I had a job to do. Holloway filed an emergency motion to cloud the title, which effectively prevented Renee and Craig from selling or encumbering the property while the legal challenge was pending. That bought us time. He also sent a formal letter to their attorney, because of course they had an attorney, outlining our grounds for challenging the transfer. Craig called me 2 days after the letter went out. He was calm. That was the unsettling part. He didn't yell or deny anything. He said in a measured voice that I was making a mistake, that I was letting outside parties complicate what was a family matter, that Renee was devastated that I was doing this to her. He said if I dropped the legal action, they were willing to give me a life estate, meaning I could live on the property until I died, but they would own it. I listened to the whole thing. Then I said, "Craig, I want you to understand something. I built my career making sure bridges didn't fall down. I know what it means for something to fail at the foundation. What you two did is a foundation failure. There's no patching it." He hung up. Renee called the next day. She cried. She told me I was breaking up the family. She said she'd done everything for my own good, that I couldn't manage the property alone, that I was going to end up losing it to taxes or letting it fall apart. She said Craig had only been trying to protect their investment. Their investment. That's the phrase she used. Their investment in my family's land. "Renee," I said, "when your grandfather was dying, he made me promise to keep this land in the family. I don't think that's what he had in mind." She cried harder. I waited. I need you to not call me again until this is resolved, I said. Not because I don't love you, but because I can't think clearly when you call, and I need to think clearly right now. I hung up. That was probably the hardest thing I've done since I buried June. The case moved through the courts over the following 5 months. Holloway was methodical and thorough. We had the notarization issue. We had the text messages where Craig explicitly discussed getting the deed handled before I had agreed to anything. We had an email where Renee wrote to Craig and accidentally copied me. She will always insist it was an accident, saying that they needed to get everything signed before Dad talks to Holloway. Before Dad talks to Holloway. That email was, as Holloway put it, the kind of evidence that tends to end cases. In March of this year, the court voided the deed transfer in its entirety. The property was restored to my name. The judge's written opinion used words like premeditated and deliberate misrepresentation. It referred the matter to the Commonwealth's attorney for potential criminal review. I sat in Holloway's conference room when we got the news. He shook my hand. His assistant, a young woman who'd been working the case with us the whole time, had to excuse herself because she was tearing up. I sat there and looked out the window at the gray March sky for a while. I wasn't happy exactly, I was relieved. There's a difference. Patrick flew in from Colorado that weekend. He didn't ask about the case details. He just showed up on Friday evening with 2 bags of groceries and made chili the way his mother used to make it. And we sat at the kitchen table and ate and didn't say much. He stayed through Sunday. Before he left, he walked out to the barn with me, the way we used to do, and we looked out at the back fields. You know, he said, Grandpa would have been proud of you. I didn't answer right away. I was thinking about my father at that mailbox in 1998, handing me a key and a set of papers, telling me this land was more than an asset, telling me it was a responsibility. I hope so, I said. As for Renee and Craig, the Commonwealth's attorney did pursue the matter. They were charged with deed fraud under Virginia law, which carries significant penalties. Their attorney negotiated a plea arrangement, and as part of the resolution, they were required to pay all legal costs and a financial penalty. Craig's real estate investment group, from what I understand, dissolved not long after. Renee sent me a letter, not an email, a handwritten letter, 4 pages long. She said she was sorry. She said Craig had convinced her it was the right thing, that she told herself it was for my benefit, that she hadn't let herself think too clearly about what they were actually doing. She said she knew that wasn't an excuse. She said she was in therapy. She said she hoped someday I would be willing to talk. I've read that letter many times. I keep it in the same drawer as June's recipe cards. I haven't written back yet. I don't know if I will. I'm 68 years old and I've learned that forgiveness is not the same thing as trust, and rebuilding trust takes longer than writing a letter. Maybe we'll get there. Maybe we won't. I hold the possibility of it without forcing it either direction. What I know is this. I walk out to that barn most mornings. I check on the back fields. I look at the tree line where the deer come out at dusk. I sit on the porch in the evenings when the weather is decent. And sometimes I talk to June, the way you do when someone has been part of you for so long that the habit of them never really leaves. This land is still in my family. 4 generations. My father's promise to his father, and my promise to my father, and the promise I intend to keep to whatever comes next. Nobody is taking that from me. Not without a fight. And as it turns out, I'm a man who knows how to fight.